I'm going to describe a scene and let's see if it's ever happened to you too. You're playing a game of chess, everything's going fine so far, you're developing all your pieces normally, and it seems like there aren't any obvious tactical shots, right? And suddenly you find yourself in a really bad position. You're lost, you don't know what to do anymore, and you need a miracle to turn the game around, hoping your opponent blunders a piece, and you start playing desperately. Little by little, our ultimate objective is to be the ones who are able to inflict this kind of strategic dominance upon our opponents. When there are no obvious tactics, if we're able to execute our game plan with absolute precision, we'll put our opponent under immense pressure, and by the time they realize it, there will be absolutely no way for them to recover. We're going to show this with a game by Bobby Fischer, one of the absolute favorite and most celebrated chess players on this channel, because he was a remarkable genius at consistently winning games when absolutely nothing at all seemed to be happening. This game was played against a Zickard in 1970. Pay attention. e4 to e5, knight to f3, and knight to c6. And Fischer plays the Rue Lopez opening, or Spanish opening, which we've thoroughly explained many different times on the channel. Which opening is it, friends? We haven't explained it on this channel. Very good. It's true that this opening is very popular, but the variation he used isn't as well known. Pay attention. The game continues with a 6, perhaps the most popular move, along with knight to f6 against the Spanish opening. And here Fischer didn't play bishop to a4, which is the main line, but instead used the exchange variation, bishop takes c6. I'll explain the pros and cons of this variation because it's important to know. The opponent's pawn structure is going to be worse. You can already see it, right? Doubled pawns. Only one central pawn, which is the king's pawn. The queen's pawn is with white, but black doesn't have it, meaning a better pawn structure. In exchange for way. In exchange for the bishop pair, for the black pieces. I really hope you enjoyed this incredible game. You will probably want to watch it several times over because we are going to talk about some complex and deep technical chess concepts, but it is really worth your time. It is just like being in a comprehensive masterclass on positional chess strategy. For those of us who love chess, we know these videos are wonderful. Let's get started. Here is where the game really begins, because up to this point they're just making theoretical moves. Well, we've developed the knight and also the bishop, so now we can castle. At this point, after castling, Locke decides to defend this e5 pawn, which is completely hanging, and many of you have probably wondered, what happens if this pawn is captured? This is theoretical. In the Spanish opening, capturing this pawn is not a good idea because after queen to d4, both the knight and the pawn are attacked. The pawn will be recovered, and on top of that, black will have a better position. So here, white castles without any fear of the pawn being captured. Sorry, white castles without trying to take advantage of this loophole, this legal gap, so to speak, in the Spanish opening, which is capturing this e5 pawn. Now, with castling, white is actually threatening knight takes e5, because the rook would then be available to enter the file and attack with a lot of force. That's why this pawn needs to be defended. Alright, there are several ways to defend it. In the game, f6 is played, a move praised by the engines. They say it's a very good move, but it doesn't seem like the main one, right? The main moves would be bishop to d6, directly defending the pawn, or queen to d6, also defending this pawn, or even playing a bit more aggressively with bishop to g4, pinning this knight on f3 directly. In the game, f6 is played, which is also a very good move, but you have to be extremely strong to play it. Why is that? Because you're just moving pawns while the player with the white pieces, in this case Fischer, is already castled and has developed pieces. Therefore, you have to be very careful. The game continues directly with b4. What is Fischer's idea? To break open the center in a clear way, and this is a trick you can use in your own games. When you see that you are ahead of your opponents in development, as is clearly the case here, right? Why? Because we have the knight and we've castled, while the opponent still has everything on the back rank. We're going to break open the center. This is theoretical, okay? You can apply this no matter what the position is, as long as you have a development advantage. Why? Because now your opponent will have to focus on the central break, and we won't give them enough time to develop pawn by pawn. And now we need to consider whether to trade queens or not. Well, it seems just a bit better to keep the queens on the board, since we're the ones who have seized the initiative. Why do we want to keep the queens on the board? Because our opponent still hasn't developed anything, and will have to waste time developing their pieces and castling the king. While they waste that time, our queen can come in to attack the king. What move should be best here for the black pieces? Well, if you've been paying attention to what I've said, c5 seems like a wonderful move. Why? Because it forces a queen exchange. The knight has to retreat no matter what to avoid being lost, and then after queen takes queen, the game would slightly favor black. Why? Because there wouldn't be any queens left on the board. However, here, the move Unzicker uses is also very good. Knight to e7. However, be careful, okay? Its move, a little bit slow, I'd say. Just a bit slow. Why? Because it prevents, or rather delays, the development of the dark square bishop by blocking it. And even though this knight will quickly come out via g6, if we look at the next two moves, bishop to e3 and knight to g6, black is still behind in development. Careful, black has the pair of bishops, let's not forget that. It might look like white is doing great, and they are, but in exchange, black has the bishop pair, which is always an advantage because they control all the squares on the board. Knight to d2, bishop to d6. Well, it's important to mention that this knight to d2 move matters for two reasons. The first is to jump to the c4 square, and the second is because the knight on c3 could quickly get squeezed by the move bishop to d4. That's why knight to d2, and after bishop to d6, this knight jumps to c4. Look at how Bobby Fischer keeps improving his pieces non-stop. This is important. Castling. Now, it's true that black is pretty much fighting for equality in development, but white already has all their pieces developed, while black still has a bishop on its original square. Therefore, here we already need to think about how to continue. A lot of people, and you mentioned this a lot in the comments, get stuck here. That is, they've developed all their pieces and castled, and then they don't know how to continue. Nice and easy, no rush. Now it's time for the major pieces, queens and rooks. First, where do we move this queen? We need to think about which square we like the most. We could consider e2, well, that wouldn't be a bad idea, but then we stop defending this knight, which could easily be attacked later. And my favorite is probably d3, right? The queen becomes very active. She can move along the third rank, she gets centralized in a spot that's not so easy to attack, just with a knight on e5, and we can always swap her with our other knight, keeping our queen on d3, right? And something very important, a little trick for you. When you only have one bishop, try to place your queen on squares of a different color than your bishop. That way, the bishop controls, for example in this case, the dark squares, and the queen controls the light squares. If you put both of them on dark squares, they get in each other's way a bit. It's true that there are cases where it's beneficial for us to have both pieces on the same color, especially, for example, if we want to attack a fianchetto. This would be to our advantage. Or if we want to sacrifice the bishop on h6 so we can recapture with the queen. But in general, we always want to place the queen on a different color than the bishop. Knight to e5, as we just mentioned, attacks the queen, but luckily we have a knight on c4 that's very well placed and can take care of eliminating this knight on e5 if we want to. And in fact, that's the best move, because if we move the queen away, it would be knight takes, queen takes, check, and the king has to go to h8. And probably after rook to e8 and bishop to e6, they would gain the initiative and we would be losing too much time. Therefore, in this case, it's better to capture. We gain the initiative because now they have to recapture no matter what, and we keep the queen in this very good spot that we want to hold on to for now. It's flexible to give a check on c4 or b3 whenever we want. Alright, here black has two options. Capture the knight with the pawn, or capture it with the bishop. Okay, capturing with the pawn would be a mistake. Let's explain this clearly. If we capture with the pawn, besides ending up with an isolated pawn, which is usually a drawback in this kind of position because it blocks this bishop, there are no knights left, and we're practically heading into an endgame where the isolated pawn is always a weakness. And above all, the most important thing is that now the white pieces could react very simply. For example, queen to b3. The king would have to move aside, and as soon as it does, we could simply continue, say, with knight to e6, threatening mate and forcing black to give up their good bishop, give up their bishop pair, especially their good bishop. Why is it the good bishop? Because the pawns are on dark squares, so the bishop on light squares will have much more freedom. So they'd have to give up their good bishop, and therefore it wouldn't be a good idea. You get it, right? Capture with the pawn. How interesting. If we weren't aware of everything we've just explained, we might actually think that capturing with the pawn is a good move. Therefore, here we realize that we should capture with the bishop. After bishop takes, we reach a position where black has the bishop pair, as we discussed, and white has good development. But of course, we have to know how to take advantage of this dynamic advantage we have, because if not, they'll end up surpassing us. Therefore, we need to attack. How can we attack? Well, for example, I noticed that the only piece we can attack is this bishop. Let's follow the logic, because all the others are. Still on the back rank, right? So how could we do it? Candidate mode. We could play knight to f3. Well, that doesn't seem like anything special to me. And the one I like the most, and I see Fischer does too, is f4, a direct move against the only developed piece, gaining the initiative. Here there are only two options, retreat the bishop or exchange it. It's clear that if you've been paying attention, the best thing for the black pieces seems to be to retreat it, right? Because otherwise they'd be giving up their pair of bishops. And what was Fischer's idea? Now, to squeeze even more in Lasker's style, this f5 move completely cuts off the good bishop. Do you see it? It's true that this just opened up the dark squared bishop, and it's now aiming directly at our cuffling. And we'll see why this doesn't worry us. Let's look at that now. But we are trapping the c8 bishop, which now has no available squares and can only go to d7. It won't be able to go to e6, and on this side it can't get out either because of a bad pawn structure. So what an interesting plan. f4 forcing the bishop to retreat, and f5 cutting off this other bishop. After this queen to e7, as you can see, we're going to directly block the dark squared bishop with bishop to f4. That's why we didn't mind opening up this diagonal toward the h2 square. It's making sense, right? You can watch the game as many times as you need, because this lesson is really valuable. Let's see, so now what should black do? Let themselves be captured, capture, or move the bishop away? Well, moving the bishop away doesn't seem like the best idea. Even though it might look like the knight is being pinned here, with a move like c3, it would be well supported. The king could move away, and the knight would be free again without any problem. Plus, if the pawn is captured, you could recapture, and this central pawn mass would be very strong. The best move here, without a doubt, seems to be to capture this bishop on f4. So what's the idea? Now white has to recapture and has, so to speak, lost a tempo with the rook, which can be taken advantage of, for example, by attacking it with the queen. In fact, first bishop to d7 is played, the rook comes to e1, improving the rook. Do you see what Fischer is doing? There's no secret to it, just putting pressure on the central pieces and improving his own pieces. Nothing more than that, without making things complicated. Very good, the rook is placed on the same file as the queen. Whenever this happens to you, it's better to move the queen, because you never know. Later it might be too late, and you'll end up in exactly the situation I explained at the beginning, right? In a situation where you're lost, and to avoid complications, the queen is attacked by a discovered attack, so we're going to move it. For example, to queen c5. The idea behind queen to c5 is obvious. At some point, block this queen so it can't move, because if the queen goes on the attack, they lose the knight. For the time being, this particular situation doesn't worry Fischer too much, and he calmly plays the move c3 to further reinforce this knight. Keep in mind that right now, this knight is completely pinned, and no matter how well it's currently defended, you could keep putting even more pressure on it, for example, by utilizing the rooks. As I was mentioning at the very beginning of the game, black continues his development with rook from A. They're placed on a semi-open file. Rooks are always better on semi-open files. Of course, it would also be possible to move the rook from f to e8. In this case, the player with the black pieces thought it was better to place the rook from a to keep this rook on f, although surely the idea, I'll tell you in advance, is to double the rooks on the e file. So it's a bit indifferent which of the rooks you bring over here. The phrase, when I was little, about 8 or 9 years old, there was a phrase from Kasparov that really stuck with me, and it went like this. Pay attention, because sometimes you don't know which rook to bring to the center. Well, what Kasparov said was, when you want to bring a rook to the center, do it with the other one. Impressive, isn't it? Because that way we usually minimize damage. That's what he said, but well, here everyone should always decide for themselves which rook they want to move, right? Alright, so what do we do now? Of course, We're in a situation where all our pieces are well placed. I can't think of any to improve because they're all good, and I feel stuck. Well, if everything's already set up, I'm gonna attack. Here we go. G4. A move that might seem a little risky, right? We're leaving our king unprotected, but let's think about something. The only pieces that can come to attack are the bishop, which is completely blocked, so it can't, and the queen, which can't do anything on her own, because these rooks won't be able to come attack the king. So we're not worried, and we can launch an attack with total success. Queen to d6, which is attacking our rook. Simple, right? Well, I defend it with, for example, queen to g3. I could move the rook, that would also be a good idea, but I prefer queen to g3, putting pressure here at some point, or forcing this kind of advance. And the queen could support them at some point, even with this h-pawn as well. Here, the German player prefers his plan of doubling rooks. It's clear that it's a good idea since he only has one semi-open file available, because the d file is a bit, let's say, crowded by his own pieces, right? So he puts the rook on e7 to place the other one on e8 and put pressure on the file. Pay attention to Fischer's plan. Knight to f3. Why? Well, it's very simple, I'll tell you right now. I made a dramatic pause, but I'll tell you right now. This knight on f3 is very well placed, supporting the advance of these two pawns. You see it? It's supporting us. So after the move c5, I understand that to prevent the knight from quickly returning to this square here, Fischer immediately breaks towards the center with this e5. The knight is perfectly positioned to initiate a powerful central break against the pawn on e5. The queen is under attack. Moving it wouldn't be a very good idea because then we'd continue with pawn takes pawn. The rook is threatened both by the pawn and by the rook. It's threatened here, so the best thing would be to capture. All right, with what do we capture? With the knight or with the rook? With neither of them, my friends. You have to stay alert. If we capture with the knight or the rook, we lose a piece. Do you see it? Two pieces defending, two pieces attacking. It's not possible to capture this pawn. So, what do? Fischer just hung a pawn. Well, no. You have to stay alert. The idea is that here, this rook is placed on n4, and together with the two rooks, the knight and the queen, a pawn is being threatened that's only defended by two pieces. It's impossible for this pawn to be defended. You could only defend it with one, and it wouldn't do any good. The game continues with bishop to c6, attacking the rook. Rook takes e5. The pawn has been recovered. The rooks are doubled because this rook is being threatened by two pieces. And now we're going to trade this rook, and you'll see why we remove pieces. The idea is not to trade the other one now, but to place this knight in an even better position. Do you see how Bobby Fischer is constantly improving his pieces? What is black doing? At the moment, nothing, just defending. And what is white doing? Placing the pieces strategically so they come together for a strong attack. When we help our pieces, they'll help us in return. There is no need to force things. h6. Careful. Whenever the pawns in the opponent's castling position move, your alarm should go off. Weaknesses and breaking points are being created. I'll say it again. Whenever the pawns in the opponent's castling position move, weaknesses and breaking points are being created. What are the weaknesses? The white squares. Why? Because both pawns are on black squares, so we can take advantage of the white ones. What are the breaking points? In this case, g5, because this pawn is creating a breaking point on g5. So here, we need to go and take advantage of it directly. h4, this pawn here isn't doing anything, so we bring it into the attack as well. Together with the g-pawn, the f-pawn, and also the knight and queen, they're all going to converge for a very dangerous attack. Bishop to d7. Should we trade this knight for this bishop? No, of course not. What's better, this little colt stuck here on e5, or a bishop that can't do anything? Without a doubt, we're not going to trade our knight. We're going to keep improving our pieces. In this case, queen to f4, with the idea of supporting this point here, and also backing up the f-file. Queen to f6, careful, they're attacking the h4 square. Can we capture this point right now, or would we be threatened by knight to g6 with a fork? It can be captured because if queen takes h4, knight to g6 with a fork, then queen takes e1 with the check in between, and when the king moves, then they can retreat it. So be careful, queen takes h4 is a real threat. What does Fischer do here? You need to pay very close attention here. By moving the white rook to the e2 square, there is now no longer any immediate threat of the bishop taking on h4, or the queen taking on h4. That would be a massive mistake for them. If the queen takes on h4, then the knight to g6 move with a devastating fork would follow immediately, and they simply wouldn't be in time to capture our rook because we've already moved it safely away. So it would be a complete and total mistake on their part. With the rook, and it would be an inevitable mate in 8. If you want, you can look this up yourselves. I don't want to drag this out much longer. So the game continues with bishop to c8, and now this queen swings to the other side to give a check. What's Fischer's idea? To take this pawn, not right away, but to control the white squares. And now he plants this knight, giving check. So here, it seems better to move to h7 square. That way, even if Fischer plays knight to g6, which he did, at least it's not check and you don't lose another tempo. And besides losing another tempo, you'd lose the rook. So here, you're basically forced into this rook exchange on e2, right? And Fischer is left in a wonderful position. What do y'all think about this? Even though there aren't any obvious tactical details, Fischer's position is easy to squeeze. And let's look at this because it's very important. Surely, many of you think I'm able to get into good positions, but sometimes I'm not able to win them. And this, be careful, used to happen to me a lot in tournaments. I used to play if the tournament had 8 rounds, and all 8 rounds I would get a better position, but then I was only able to win 5. How can that be? Because we have to work on converting advantages. Let's see how Fischer does it. In this case, after this move, bishop to d7, he starts with qe7, just as you hear it, forcing the queen exchange. This queen has nowhere else to go. She has to leave to exchange this queen. And why exchange queens if this looks like a completely equal endgame? 3 pawns versus 3 pawns, 2 pawns versus 4 pawns, this would mean total material equality. The idea is that this knight is superior to this bishop. I'm going to give you this as another piece of advice. Wow, just look at how much advice you're getting in a single lesson, huh? This is amazing. Well, the idea is that for me, in an endgame with just a bishop versus a knight, I always prefer to have the knight if things are equal. A lot of people don't like this. This is just my opinion, okay? Why? Because the knight can go to every square on the board, every single one. The bishop, for example, if it's a light squared bishop, I can put all my pawns on dark squares and you'll never be able to attack them. That's the reason why I prefer having the knight over the bishop. Also, this 3 versus 2 on the queen side looks much stronger than this 4 versus 3, since these pawns are doubled and it might be a bit harder for them to promote without the support of the king. Alright, let's see how Fischer did it. Here, black played this g5 move to try to block this pawn majority on the king side. Alright, pawn takes pawn, I secure a 2 versus 1 majority. For now, these connected pawns are extremely strong, because even if this pawn didn't exist, let's do a little imagination exercise. We remove all the pieces and all the pawns except these two, okay? The king is never going to be able to capture the back pawn, because if he does, this pawn will run away and the king won't catch it. For example, if he takes it, the pawn advances and promotes, as you can see. 2 connected pawns are extremely strong, which is why Fischer keeps these 2 on g and f. The game continues like this. Knight to d5. We improve the knight while gaining initiative, attacking the c7 square, and even more importantly, do you see it? We're threatening the double attack with knight to f6 check, and then I take the bishop, so the important thing is to defend this spot here. How? Well, for example, with bishop to c6, the bishop moves away while attacking the knight, so now it can't come here anymore. Of course, logically, we've already won a pawn. We're up a pawn. What does that mean? 3 against 3 equal here, and 2 against 1, an advantage on the king side. Careful, because the bishop is coming to attack this square, and it can't be defended. The great thing about the knight is that it has this magical triangulation. I love playing with knights, especially when I'm low on time. I handle them really well. And here Fischer does the same, knight to e8, defending this pawn. You can't take it because then comes knight to f6, check, and I take the bishop. From a distance, the knight triangulates and defends the g4 pawn. Look at how beautiful that is. King to h6. Now this pawn is being threatened, but now I can simply come and defend it. King to g7. I must move the knight. They'll take my pawn. It's fine. I'll counterattack. First you attack my knight, well, then I attack your bishop. If you take my knight, I take your bishop. It's a one endgame, no doubt about it. because this 2 versus 1 will end up giving a huge advantage and queening a pawn without any problem. What should black do? Move the bishop away, clearly. Now what? Do I move the knight and lose the pawn? Well, yes. Why? Because I move it while attacking another pawn. Do you see the difference? If you take me here, I take you there. And that's it. It's over. Just like that. So, well, they move this pawn away, and I simply defend on g3 with the king. See? The way Fischer is playing, if you understand it, is super simple and super effective. This pawn is defended, and as you can see, black can't do anything now. Fischer's next move will be knight to c5, attacking the b pawn, and if it moves, he'll take the a pawn. So that would already be 2 pawns up. So here, the player with the black pieces, Unzicker, decided to resign the game, and it was a very reasonable decision. Probably here, you could win with a little more time with the white pieces. But at this level, among the best in the world, obviously you can already see there's nothing to be done here. What did you think of this lesson, this game? Did you like it? Let me know in the comments if you want more games like this with commentary. What did you think? If you want more games with white, with black, do you prefer openings? What do you like? I love talking with you all. Talk to me. You already know that if you want to try the app I use, I'm leaving it right down here for you. I really like it because it has a lot of features, but above all, the feature I like the most is the one for studying openings, because there are multiple lines and it's similar to my videos. So if you want, I'll leave it for you down here in the description. And stay tuned, friends, because soon I'm going to show you what I've prepared for all of you. I just can't hold it in any longer. I'm going crazy because I just can't wait any longer. I'm really looking forward to it. I hope you loved this video. Tomorrow we'll be back on the channel as always. If you want to try the app, you have it right below in the description. And as always, I'll see you tomorrow in the next video, friends. Goodbye.